So I'm Mike Jacobson, professor at Pennsylvania State University, Forest Ec. Sorry, is that better? No? Better? Okay. So I'm a professor of forest economics at Penn State, and I've been working on agroforestry a long time, and it's a pleasure to be here. Okay. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So I've got 10 minutes to tell you about what's going on in North America, and I'm going to talk about the United States. Andy Gordon will talk about Canada. And basically, I was past president of the Association for Temperate Agroforestry, which is the sister organization Christian was talking about, and I had the pleasure to be here in 2012 when the European Federation was started. And I'm really impressed to see how far you guys have come. And although Christian mentioned that we've had about 14 North American agroforestry conferences, I would say you guys are advancing very rapidly. And what I want to do today is just give you some overview, a taste of what I could gather what's going on in the United States. Now, it's not that easy because it's a big country, there's a lot of activities, and so when I was asked to give this talk, I went to all my colleagues I could ask for to give me examples. And it's not going to be very extensive, but it'll give you a feeling for what's going on. So the first question is, where is agroforestry? And in those of you who were in 2012, we did a quick and dirty survey of where agroforestry was, and we came up with this map. And you can tell that it's almost in every state and in almost every province in Canada. In fact, it is, but these are the people who responded. So one of the questions is, why aren't more people doing it? And this is the age-old question we heard Rosa talk about as well. And I talked to my colleagues, and they say they hear more, but is there more? It's hard to document. There's a few big inventories done by the government to capture resources, more for forestry and natural resources. They're beginning to think about agroforestry collection through the National Agroforestry Center, which I'll talk about a little bit more. The Natural Resource Conservation Service provides technical assistance, and they're beginning to gauge how many acres of different agroforestry projects are there or installations. And you can see by that map there's trying to gather numbers of silvopasture, which is hard to do. And they're also beginning to use remote sensing to look at trees on farms. But as Rosa alluded to, and others already, that the problem is, the lack of awareness, the lack of a profile for agroforestry, and then the financial and institutional resources to make it happen. So, but the focus is clearly on the environmental services. To make agroforestry work, we have to show that there's environmental benefits, and that's where the focus is. But, I like to show this slide because it's a trade-off. We need to also have the farmers get income from this, maybe indirectly, non-market values, but we need to show that there's the ecosystem services and the profits. So as I said, I'm going to just show you some activities from around the country. So the first one is in the Chesapeake Bay. I'm from Pennsylvania, and actually the next North American Agroforestry Conference next year will be in Blacksburg, Virginia, which is just south in the Chesapeake Bay region, so we invite you all to come out to that. But obviously water quality is a big issue in that region, from nitrogen runoff from mainly agriculture. And this slide, this graph just shows you the targets for nitrogen reduction that are in the far left column. And then we talk about maize, and you can see how that doesn't meet those targets for nitrogen reduction. But if we converted the area to switchgrass or some other energy crops, perhaps, we'd get a lot more benefits, and we'd also be able to in terms of nitrogen reduction, and we'd also be able to meet water quality targets much better. So there's this idea of water quality benefits from alternative energy crops replacing maize, but also getting income from the bioenergy. Another example from my colleagues in the Midwest is the same issue, the nutrient loading going down the Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico, hypoxia in the Gulf, dead zones. So again, they're using buffers. One of my students here, Patrick Bowman, this afternoon will talk about a buffer project in the Chesapeake Bay region to reduce nitrogen loading. Silvopasture, obviously a big story in all of our agroforestry systems. examples of using pigs to control invasive species and provide the ground for regeneration of the species. We're using goats, for example, in New York to chew on the invasive species to provide better regeneration. In the South, they're using silvopasture with pines, especially with disadvantaged or minority landowners. And also in the Pacific Northwest, Christmas trees and sheep is a pretty big agroforestry system. And one of the questions is also, can agroforestry help the cattle industry? And if you look at the heat index in the Midwest, we all know about climate change, another environmental service Rosa talked about. But trees obviously provide the important shade, and some numbers from the Center for Agroforestry at the University of Missouri talks about without shade, the livestock industry can lose about $2 billion annually, so trees are very important. Another interesting or pretty large agroforestry adoption is for odor control, and you can see here on the left, poultry houses in Pennsylvania are growing rows of willow shrub, which is an energy crop as well, but it also absorbs the emissions from the poultry houses, and so there's an odor control and an air pollution control. Colleagues at University of Minnesota are working on snow control up in the northern tier. You can see how rows of trees can actually make a big difference in terms of snow control in the highway, and so that's another important area. An example from the Southwest, I just try to get examples from around the country, is wastewater treatment, growing trees to get rid of wastewater and biosolids. So it's a way for the wastewater treatment plants and phytoremediation to deal with the waste, but also create a crop. And that's actually around the country now, and it's becoming a very important environmental service that trees could provide, like poplars and willows. Non-timber forest products, forest farming. In the Northeast, we have many medicinal plants, and so we're trying to talk about organic markets. Ginseng is a very big product, and golden seal, and getting them organically certified. And also there's a new project called the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition. And just another example from the Midwest, where you can see the numbers here that they've done some enterprise budgets on many of these agroforestry crops, providing quite decent incomes if they can find the markets. University of Minnesota, also multiple different types of agroforestry crops. And, so those are just some examples of the different types of projects. So we also do, at many of the universities and institutions, we do outreach programs. Here's just one example that's very active at the Center for Agroforestry, where they do workshops. In Pennsylvania, we do workshops. In Virginia, we do workshops. But Missouri also has a webinar series, and they also have an agroforestry academy where they bring in practitioners, farmers, and we're also going to be starting one up in the Northeast, where they come for a week training. And also the Center for Agroforestry, I'll just mention, has an online program which is teaching agroforestry for a master's degree. And then there are numerous publications, and I just threw up these. Most of these come from the National Agroforestry Center. You can Google their website, everything's up there. I mean, the idea is, Rosa mentioned your website, URAF, and ours, and I think there's a lot of ways we can work together. We work on very similar systems. And I mentioned the Association for Temperate Agroforestry. This is a website. We operate a little bit differently to you, but I would encourage you to go to the website. It's actually revamped. We have a very good board of directors now, very active through social media, Facebook, Twitter, to try and get the word out and increase interest in agroforestry. And we also provide demonstration projects on this website, and we're trying to make it a clearinghouse of everything that's happening in agroforestry. And finally, one of the things is, obviously it's a big country, so we created these regional working groups with assistance from the National Agroforestry Center. And so you can see we're trying to develop more localized activities instead of just the Association for Temperate Agroforestry. And so I'll leave you with that. Just a reminder that in the Chesapeake Bay region is where we're going to have our next year's conference, and we look forward to seeing many of you coming from Europe and other countries to that. So I'll turn it over to Andy.